When you hear the words Nissan and GTR, you think of one of two things. One, an ex-shed dweller's daily driver, or Godzilla, the R32 Nissan Skyline four-wheel drive touring car thing that obliterated touring cars in the late 80s and early 90s. And it's thought that the name Godzilla originated in Australia because it was a Japanese monster devouring everything else on track. But while Nissan had been supplying engines to non-hybrid LMP1 teams as well as LMP2 and LMP3 teams in endurance racing, they hadn't been in the top class of endurance racing as their own entity since 1999 when the R391 was running around. But in 2014, Nissan decided to come back to top level endurance racing with the GTR-LM, a project that was announced in the May of 2014, and the motorsport world went crazy. Oliver Marriage was working for a little known British motoring magazine called Top Gear, and he was invited to go and have a look at this car when it was first announced. He assumed he'd be signing NDAs left, right and centre, and all he would be allowed to tell people is that he was in Atlanta, USA, and that he'd seen some demo runs from a few hundred yards away, and he'd get some stock photos to show in the magazine. But he, like everybody else, was pleasantly surprised when Nissan allowed journalists to look at every nut, bolt and washer and get a good look at the engine, the gearbox and everything else. And designer Ben Bowlby was also happy to talk about anything and everything, including the brief that came from Nissan bosses in Yokohama, which was, don't copy Audi. And not copying Audi was a lot easier to do in LMP1 compared to, say, copying Ferrari in Formula 1. There's enough leeway in the LMP1 rules, well, was enough leeway in the LMP1 rules, which meant that Bowlby could design something that wasn't an Audi clone. So he decided to put the engine in the front, which hadn't been done since Panoz, if you're Spanish, in 2003, and used a loophole in the rulebook to design the car backwards so all the downforce would be at the front. Hit the microphone again. The car was basically designed so that the rear end of the car would be made as small as possible to eliminate drag and achieve mega top speeds on the Mulsanne. The car also had narrower rear tyres for less drag and stuff. Carbon fibre body, 3-litre twin-turbo V6 and a KERS system tuned to 11. What could possibly go wrong? They also took that KERS system and modified it so it was hooked up to some epicyclic gearboxes in the wheel hubs that could allow four-wheel drive if it needed to go to four-wheel drive. And in all, this car would be good for about 1200 horsepower. But then the problem started because Nissan turned to Nismo for the design of that particular KERS system, but there had been little to no communication, so both sides had built their part of the car differently, so that when it all came together in the same room, none of it fit properly. But at least the bodywork processed the air cleanly, but the exhausts were effectively pointed in the driver's face, which would have looked cool, but it's not exactly what you want while downshifting into Indianapolis at 3 AM. Nissan was also insistent on using this Formula 1 style KERS system instead of going full, proper hybrid like Audi, Porsche, and now Formula 1, and they designed an elaborate computer system to get this KERS system to work. When the brakes were applied, the computer decided whether it was going to use the actual brakes or the inertia of an 8kg flywheel. A flywheel that needed to be encased in a vacuum because it spun up so fast it broke the sound barrier. And the figures it produced were hilarious. Braking could send that flywheel spinning at 60,000 RPM, which meant the outer edge of the flywheel was subjected to 47,000, yes 47,000 G, and it spun at Mach 2. At a less funny level, it could send the forces back into the wheels as fast as it harvested those forces, something to the tune of about 700 horsepower. The computer also deployed KERS automatically as opposed to how it was in 2013 with the Formula 1 cars where it was done through a button on the steering wheel. Nissan said, "The plan is to harvest from the front and deploy from the rear. Imagine if we turned up to Le Mans with front drive only." The aero was weird too. Now bear with me because a 3D model in a Assetto Corsa is all I can really show you. The front splitter was designed to send a load of air under the car, but it diffused immediately instead of waiting for it to get to the rear like in an F1 car for instance. The engine was placed high to allow for two huge air tunnels to run to the back, and then they fitted a small diffuser to allow for the rear to be sucked to the ground. The rear wing was effectively for show, and it meant that drag was reduced considerably at the rear. And with everything needing to keep the drive at the front, it meant a lot of weight over the front was there to keep the front tyres gripped up, which explains the massive bonnet. The car was then delayed to go racing because it failed the crash tests. Twice. As you can imagine, this caused delays that needed fixing, but they finally got the car to Le Mans. Problem is, it was supposed to do the first 2 rounds at Silverstone and Spa. And to make matters worse, they turned up to Le Mans with no flywheel system, so the car was running on just the twin-turbo V6, and the flywheel still had to be in the car to meet the minimum weight requirements. So with all this added up, the fastest of the 3 Nissans taken to Le Mans was 20 seconds off the pole-setting Porsche, and one of them was actually out-qualified by an LMP2. The clutch on Jan Mardenborough's car then gave out, and because the front was packaged so weirdly, or badly depending on how you look at it, that had to miss the start of the race while they faffed about trying to fix it. The number 21 Nissan was then killed off when the suspension went bang in the night, ripping the front left wheel clean off. The different axle speeds then treated the engine to a midnight snack of itself. This then sent the traction control into meltdown and the power got shut off, and by the time the team got to the car after the race, it had been stripped of bodywork by souvenir hunters. Mardenborough's car completed the vast majority of the race until the gearbox exploded, and the car of Alex Buncombe, Harry Tinknell and Michael Kroom did actually complete the race, but they were so far down on everybody else they weren't actually classified. The winning Porsche team, which included F1 driver Nico Hülkenberg, completed 395 laps. Nissan completed 342. So why did it all go so badly wrong for probably the most anticipated Le Mans car of the last 10 years? Had it worked, this car would have been pretty good. But this is the thing with LMP1s or any car that goes to Le Mans or indeed does any endurance race. It's got to be bomb-proof and get to Warp 9 faster than the USS Defiant. The concept wasn't actually as flawed as people make it out to be. The concept could have actually worked. They would have been competitive, but beating the might of Porsche and Audi would have still taken some doing. The front engine concept, layout, whatever you want to call it, could have worked if Nissan had spent a bit more time on it. Their flywheel setup never wanted to work properly and it was stupidly heavy, and while they had managed to get a proper hybrid system design taking cues from the Renault hybrid F1 engines, because Nissan and Renault are basically the same company, the entire team was sacked by email over the Christmas season of 2015. Most of the people who worked on that car found out they'd been sacked through a Nissan press release. They also never took the time to iron out any of the issues in the build quality and the aerodynamics, if indeed they actually had the time to do so because they were fixing other things, and this was mostly due to the crash tests and stuff like that. There were reports that the car was generating rear lift in the wind tunnel tests. All the issues added up, most of which I haven't gone over to save you some time, led to the project being about 6 to 8 months behind schedule, and instead of taking the extra year and debuting in 2016, they rushed straight into 2015 after missing the first 2 rounds at Silverstone and Spa. They went straight in at the deep end at the toughest race of the year, where it became an absolute failure and the biggest meme in endurance racing. At least that is until Toyota retired on the last lap. Which meant they would have had to have corrected all the errors to get it to run properly in 2016, by which time they'd be effectively running the 2015 car, while Porsche, Toyota and Audi would have had new cars which were even better than they were previously. Nissan would be, by this point, about 18 months behind them, to the point where there would be absolutely no point in spending the money anymore. But that's not to say that Nissan was a total failure elsewhere, because they won Super GT 2 years in a row at this time. They also won the Blancpain Endurance Pro Series and the Bathurst 12 Hour with the GTR GT3. But on the other hand, they continued to sell the Duke. But it was a popular car, the GTR-LM, not the Duke. People talked about it then and people talk about it now. It's up there with the Brabham fan car, ground effect Lotus and that 6-wheeler acid trip that Cantirol had. And any diagrams, figures, technical details you'll find on this car on the internet are all numbers and stuff that were released by Nissan. They wanted people to know exactly what they were going to do, even if the thing did commit seppuku on itself. If you want all the facts and figures for this car, they're out there. Obviously I'd love to show you all the nitty gritty details, a picture of the flywheel, a picture of the gearbox, a full spread of the engine, but I'm just not going through all that copyright shit again. But now that LMP1 is dead and LMHC has taken over, the Longboi looks consigned to the history books. But, Mazda is looking at a comeback, maybe Nissan will as well. So then, a quick look back at the Nissan LMP1 fail, and if you've learned something about this doomed yet interesting car, you can show me you've liked it by, liking the video. And if you want to see more like this, then you can hit subscribe and get the bell on if you haven't already, so you never miss out on a future video of mine. Massive thanks as ever go out to the good folk of Patreon who continue to support me on a more personal level, and if you do want to leave me a monthly tip, you can do so by following the links in the description, where you'll also find a link to Discord and directions to my social media. So until next time, I've been AdmiralLaWind, have a great day wherever you live in the world, and I'll see you all again soon for another video. So until next time, goodbye.